One good afternoon, everybody. It's John Barrows with Make It Happen Monday. Hopefully, y'all had a fantastic weekend. We actually didn't have a podcast last week or a Make It Happen session to recognize Memorial Day, but did want to pause here for a second and just say thanks to all those men and women overseas who are kicking ass for us and letting us live this incredible lifestyle of ours. And just as a reminder, everybody, the J Barrows store where you see all this Make It Happen gear, 100% of profits and proceeds goes to veterans in the arts. So if you're looking to support veterans and get some cool gear to motivate yourself, please check out the store, and we write that big fat check at the end of the year for all the profits that you guys. So I want to thank everybody for the support on that. And also thank you for support on the podcast, because we hit 100,000 downloads recently, which blows my mind. Really appreciate all the feedback and insights. And with that, I am actually super excited for today's, not that I'm not excited for other ones, but I'm really excited for this one. First of all, we had to reschedule it once, so we're back on track. And this is one that I have a lot of questions about. So I wanted to introduce and welcome a friend of mine, Chris Orlob from Gong. Chris, say hi to everybody. Give a little background, your little 30-second about where you're coming from and what Gong's all about.
Yeah, super excited to be here. It's been too long time of a coming, I think, but my name's Chris. I run product marketing over here at Gong. Short story is previously I was co-founding a company that was competing with Gong, or probably attempting to compete with Gong. That's probably the more accurate situation. We ended up joining forces. But before that, I was a regional sales manager over at InsideSales.com in Provo, Utah. Started off as an SDR, worked my way as an account executive, ended up in that last position, and that's my background. Super excited to talk about what we have on the table here.
I love it. And by the way, I got to give you guys kudos. First of all, you said the new branding's coming out today. So
yeah, new brand. No more Gong Blue. It's like the vintage stuff that's hopefully going to be like sold on eBay for thousands of dollars 20 years from now or something like that.
I'm sure you got cabinets of it too. So keep it close. But so your new brand, new website looks awesome. And one of the things that I just want for everybody out there listening right now, I get asked all the time, John, what podcast should I listen to? What blog should I read to educate myself? And the number one that I almost always recommend is Gong's, because you guys put out some incredible content that's not just about somebody's opinion or whatever, but really is backed up with data. So I wanted to give you huge kudos on that. We're going to dive into some of those. But I wanted to start with kind of a bigger picture, right? And this is the whole, is cold calling dead? I hate that question, but I'm going to put a little bit of a different spin because I think it's absolute bullshit. I think cold calling is still alive and well if done right, and if it's part of the package, right? It's no longer 100 dials a day and just blindly making cold calls, but the phone is not dead. But something shook me a little while ago, and this is why I'm really interested in your perspective on this. I wrote a blog post probably, I want to say a year ago, that said I think the phone is going to make a raging comeback, right? Because I saw a couple of emails written by these artificial intelligence bots that were highly personalized and better than a sales rep could ever write. So I'm like, well, shit, in a year or two, none of us are going to trust a single email that's in our inbox because it's all suspect, right? So with that, I was like, well, phone, that's the final frontier. That's the part that robots and technology is not going to be able to take away from us because of empathy, because of listening to tone and that type of stuff. But then I saw the fucking Google Home thing, call up and make a hair appointment. And then the hair appointment was like, holy shit. But when it ordered Chinese food from somebody who could barely speak English and was able to navigate that conversation and do some and be able to understand what that person was saying, I was like, uh-oh. So I guess my question for you is, with your background with InsideSales.com, with now, and starting another company, and I mean, you guys are all in on phone. That's it, right? I mean, that's what your focus is. So you've bet your entire business, and there's a huge amount of money going into this space too. So there's obviously something that says phone is still going to be around, but where do you see the future of phone going, based with the Google and all that other stuff and AI stuff going on?
So the first part of it is whether cold calling is dead or not, there's still going to be a phone interaction that's required to close a deal, like usually over a web conference. But let's just narrow the conversation for the sake of having this argument about Google. Is AI going to kill that stuff? And if you think about those Google Home demonstrations and you think about the person who was on the receiving end of that phone call, they're literally paid to take that call. They're not going to hang up on you. And so AI, yes, it's very impressive that it was able to navigate the various paths that that conversation could have gone down. Yeah. Although I would argue there's probably only 3 to 5 paths, so it's not that complicated. But cold calling is a little different because you're pushing a boulder up a hill. The person on the other line is in constant threat of hanging up on you because they generally don't want to be hearing from you. And so when people come to the conclusion, well, Google Home, booked a hair appointment for me, and so cold calling is dead, it's totally a different scenario. It's the same medium, which is a phone call, but worlds different scenarios. One of them, somebody is literally paid, no matter how bad of a conversationalist you are, they're not hanging up on you. The other one is you could say the same words just with the wrong tone, or you could change one word from a sentence and they'll hang up on you. It's much more sensitive. With all of that said, so my prediction is AI is not going to replace professional sellers making calls, but humans are also horrible at predicting the future. In 2001, we all thought nobody's going to be writing code in 10 years in 2011, and it's 2018, still people are writing code. So.
Well, shit, we all thought the world was going to end in 1999 because all of a sudden there was 4 decimal points instead of 2, right?
Yeah, in 2012, even me in 2012, I was like looking out the window, see if the Mayans were right on December 21st or whatever it was.
That was my birthday, so I threw a bender. So December 21st is my birthday. On 2012.
23rd, represent December.
There you go. So I'm like, hey, if I'm going out strong. So fuck it, let's party. But I agree with you. So well, then let's take another little bit of because I think that context is perfect in the sense that, when it's somewhat of a predictable path and you're talking to somebody who's paid to take your call, I think, AI and Google take care of that for me. My assistant, hey, Google, make me a hair appointment. Hey, Google, make me a reservation at a restaurant. Cold call, different when it could go a million different tracks. Mm-hmm. Although, you see the intersection to a certain degree because people have tried to script out, like when you go to an outsourced cold calling company, they try to script out, hey, if they say this, then do this. If they say that, then do this. So I can see where somebody's going to try to do it. Whether it's going to be successful or not is the other story. The other layer to this, though, is the generational divide, right? In the sense that one of the things I tell kids when I make, when I'm doing my training is one of the big reasons I recommend you make phone calls. Well, there's 2, and I'll get to the second one. But the first one is Gen Xers. I'm a Gen Xer 42. We're now the decision makers, right? So, and I grew up on the phone. So there are people, and you bring in neuro-linguistic programming, and there's different types of communicators. So, if you send all emails, you're reducing your chances of connecting with a decent part of the population. But do you think that cold calling, when millennials take over, right, really take over decision-making, when they hit their 40s and that type of stuff, where do you see phone fitting into that? Because millennials didn't grow up with the phone like this. They grew up with it like this. So do you think that's going to have a big impact on the actual usage of phone in the future?
So here's what I would say. First of all, if the phone dies in the most literal sense of the word, meaning it is no longer a communication platform, then obviously cold calling is going to be dead. But that's, very uncertain as to whether that could happen. The second thing I would say is part of the effectiveness of a communication channel is its novelty, not necessarily its newness, but how infrequent are people bombarded on that channel. And right now, very few people are getting hit with the phone because either people think cold calling is dead, or most millennials are, frankly, the real underlying reason is they're scared to make a cold call. It's a terrifying thing to do.
Totally is.
And so it's kind of like LinkedIn InMail. When LinkedIn first became popular, if you got an InMail, it was like, oh, goody. Right. I got a message from somebody. I never get messages from, and so you would respond, and it was super effective. And now you're spammed to Sunday on LinkedIn. You don't respond, and so that's a really long way of me saying if nobody is making calls, but people still have phones, you have the opportunity of a lifetime to bring novelty back to the phone. Now they're bombarded in email and social media, and they're getting tweeted at. And so when they get a phone call, again, I'm a human, could be horrible at predicting the future, but the one phone call they get a week, it's a novelty. So they're going to answer, and it's going to be an effective conversation.
I love that, because I was at a conference a little while ago, and this was actually 2 years ago, when same questions, cold calling dead, bullshit, whatever, and one of the somebody asked this panel of executives who was sitting on the, hey, what's the newest coolest app to get in front of you executives, like what's the newest thing that gets your attention? And all of them in unison said phone.
See, and I think the app thing, it's just a way for us to avoid our fears of doing something difficult and scary and looking for instant gratification. What app can I go download that's going to suddenly help me book a bunch of meetings? It's the wrong question to ask. It's just fear of avoidance.
I couldn't agree more. That's why I just get on the damn phones. And that's what I tell kids, look, what's the absolute worst thing that can happen when you get on a phone with a cold call? Unless you're blatantly disrespectful and doing something super unethical and shady, then, you do that and they might call your boss and get you fired. That's okay. But that's you being a douche. But if you're taking a legitimate approach and you're making a phone call and you might get a little bit more aggressive or whatever it is, the absolute worst thing they could do is hang up on you. That's why I don't understand that. I get the fear, but if you have some fun with it, then you can flip it around pretty easy.
Well, I think the fear comes from this lizard brain concept. We, as humans, I won't get into brain science, but we have this amygdala, and that part of the brain developed in a time where humans lived in very small tribes. Mm-hmm. And the reason we're scared of getting rejected on the phone in today's day and age when we don't live in tribes is our brain is built for the day and age when we did live in these small tribes. And if we got rejected from a tribe 1,000,000 years ago, it literally meant we were going to die because we were ostracized from the tribe. We were kicked out into the wilderness. Getting rejected was actually a big deal 1,000,000 years ago. Now we live in these big metropolitan cities where our survival is not dependent on being accepted by one specific tribe. But our brain's evolution has not caught up consciously, but our brain thinks that if we get rejected, it's going to mean death in one way or another. So cold calling success is really simple. It's not easy, but it's really simple. You just have to go against your brain's natural wiring. You're going to be scared. Eventually you'll do it enough. You won't be scared anymore, but initially, what separates successful people from unsuccessful people is, can they take action in the face of fear?
Interesting. I love that. Because and actually that leads to that's a great segue here for us as far as the data. Because you look at data and science and those type of things, and they tend to debunk a lot of stuff that our perception of is, right? People say cold calling's dead, but I look at the data and I say, look, the kids who make cold calls actually have much higher conversion ratios than the kids that don't, right? People who are on the phones, likewise. So we're going to start with, out of all the posts that you've done, because I want to dig into a couple of them, but of all of the posts you've done, has data shown you something? Has there been kind of for you personally, based on your experience as an SDR and those type of things, has there been something where data has shown you whoa, my perception was wrong because the data says this? Is there something that kind of stands out that we could learn from that?
Yeah, so we analyze all different types of calls: discovery calls, demo, closing calls, cold calls. And there's actually a lot of counterintuitive insights, but I'll just talk about one since it's kind of thematic and addresses what we've already been talking about, which is cold calling. In every type of sales call we've analyzed, discovery calls, demos, etc., there's been a strong correlation between talking less and success rate, eventually closing the deal or moving it to the next step, except for cold calling. So what we found in cold calling, and this is correlation, not necessarily causation, I would make sure that point is well understood, is that successful cold calls actually involve higher talk to listen ratios on the rep's part, longer monologues where it's the rep was talking for a very long time uninterrupted, and very little talking from the customer's end. And again, how you interpret that data is important, and probably many people have different interpretations of that data, which means correlation and causation are different things. But what that means to me is that cold calling is not about discovery. If you open a cold call and say, John, what are your biggest strategic priorities coming into this year? You're probably going to laugh in my face or hang up on me. Cold calling is about making a highly targeted and resonant pitch to sell the meeting. And the best way you can do that is knowing your buyers. Part of that is research, and that's going to be on the shoulders of the rep or the SDR. But I mean, maybe I'm biased. A lot of that comes down to product marketing. Is product marketing helping you understand your buyer personas, their pain points? Are they doing research into the market to arm you to speak resonantly? Or are you going in and guessing?
I absolutely love that because I preach that. So one of the things I use to train reps on is, the old school Glengarry, Glen Ross, right? Which, whatever, terrible, like great movie, bad, but depressing as shit. Awesome. Right? But in there, Alec, when he does his always be closing, whatever, but he talks about AIDA, right? Attention, interest, desire, action. And I looked that up. 1898, a guy by the name of St. Elmo Lewis came up with, he said, these are the 4 mental stages, right? We have to go through before we buy something. First, something needs to get our attention. Then we have to be interested. Then we have to have a desire. So what I say, you have 5 to 15 seconds to get someone's attention. That earns you a couple of minutes where you can create interest. And that's what you're selling. When you're making cold calls, you are not selling your solution. You are selling time. You are selling interest. You are selling the next step. Yeah. So that makes total sense to me on a cold call, that because I couldn't agree more, where some kid calls me up out of nowhere and says, so John, tell me about your priorities for the year. And what are your, I'm like, fuck off. Like, who are you? Right. But if somebody comes at me and says, hey, John, thanks for taking my call real quick. The reason for my call today is we're showing VPs of sales like you in your industry how to drive these type of results with our solution. And I just wanted to see if that was worth having a deeper dive conversation into. Yeah,
good cold calling follows the same rule as really good writing. So like if you've ever studied writing, there is a rule that says the purpose of every sentence you write is to compel the reader to read the next sentence. And cold calling should be exactly the same. You should be economical with your words, not frivolous. Every word and every sentence you say should be designed to prolong the conversation, whether it's getting them talking or getting them listening to your next sentence, which in turn is designed to get them to linger.
Yeah. That's awesome, man, because I think that's what a lot of people make the mistake of when cold calling or leaving voicemail messages, is they're literally trying to sell their product or service during that call. So they treat it as a quick discovery or something. Let me ask you 15 questions before I, throw up on you, or, let me just tell you literally everything about what we do to see if you're interested in buying from it. But if you segment that down into that's why I love the AIDA, because it's the same thing with emails, right? The subject line gets my attention. The first sentence tells me whether I'm interested in having this conversation, like in reading the rest of it. The next part is your value proposition to create my desire to say, ooh, I want that. And then there's your call to action, right? It's the same thing with calls. Literally the first few words that come out of my mouth make a difference. So go ahead.
No, well, I was just going to say, what I was thinking the entire time are selling does not come down to knowing what tactics. It doesn't come down to knowing the tactics and strategies. It comes down to knowing which tactics and strategies apply to which situation. Because AIDA, if you took that as a generalized strategy to apply to all of your sales calls, you'd fail miserably. If you enter a discovery call and you're thinking in terms of AIDA, not going to work. But when you apply AIDA to your cold call, and I won't be attached to the methodology here, but spin or solution selling to your discovery and challenger sale to your presentation, that's where like super successful people, or that's where people become super successful at selling. They know which tactics apply to which parts of the sales cycle.
No, I love it. And that it's actually interesting because that, going back to the A, right? Attention. You put out a post a little while ago that helped and hurt me. So based on data, right? Because you've heard me, everybody, there's one of my favorite nuggets is, and I say this, like when you introduce yourself, it matters, right? So when you call up and say, hi, blah, 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 this is John Barrows from so-and-so, that actually automatically puts the buyer in a mindset of, oh, this is a sales rep. Let me figure out how I can get off this call. So you want to disrupt that a little bit. So we talk about powerful and weak introductions. And one of my favorite powerful introductions, and I'm psyched it was on your list, is the reason for my call is, right? Mm-hmm. So it gets right to the point. But you brought up another one that I rail against as like the shittiest way to introduce yourself. But you said it was like the number one way. And so based on data, I've stopped shitting on it as much. But it's the, hey, how you doing today? Or the better one, which was, how have you been?
How have you been? So here's a couple things I would say about this. First, I have two. Number one, you can't compare how have you been to the reason for my call, because they are different openers that can be used in conjunction. They serve different purposes. So one is not better than the other. In fact, I would say, like, just, based on my own intuition, not data, the reason for my call is actually a better opener because it's timeless. Right. It's built on like human psychology, humans crave reasons, whereas how have you been is going to have a shelf life. I can't, ever since I published that article, I've probably gotten 30 cold calls where somebody thought it was clever and cheesy to open with, hey, Chris, how have you been? The first time I thought it was funny. The second time I was already past it. I was like, I need to write a new post already because this one's already dead. So that's one point I would make is the timeless stuff, like stating the reason for the call, is what you really need to master. This other stuff has shelf lives. Like, did I catch you at a bad time? At one point, it was probably successful. We found out that it's 40% less successful than our baseline, which goes to show a lot of these techniques have shelf lives, and you need to be on the cutting edge of your profession.
And that's why I talk about split testing and trying new things all the time, because what worked last year is not working anymore. That I rail on that shitty breakup email of 1, 2, 3 stuck under a rock or getting chased by a hippo, right?
Yeah.
But 3 years ago when SalesLoft came up with that, it worked like a charm.
Yeah.
Because the first time,
I thought it was hilarious. Yeah. And now I'm like as annoyed by it as you are.
Like, because the first time you get that, you're like, oh no, I'm not stuck under a rock, right? But then the very next time you get that, you're like, oh shit, this is a technique, right? So that's why I think what you guys are doing with the data, and Brian Carville asked, Brian, just go to gong.io and go to their blog. We'll post it in the questions here, but he said, hey, how can I get to that? And it looks like we just posted it there. So, but that's why gaining insights out of that data is invaluable right now to keep reps on top of what's working now. Even subject lines. Like I tell reps, and here's a tip for everybody listening, but people ask me, John, what's a good subject line? I'm like, I don't know, because again, it changes so frequently. So just literally go on Google and type in best subject lines 2018, and somebody like Gong on the email side of the house is doing research and reports on high open rates, low open rates, those type of things, and you just have to follow those trends.
Yeah.
Because there are some fundamentals, and I think a lot of the fundamentals, and I appreciate you kind of bringing this stuff up, is based on the psychology of humans and how we are wired. So I think that is going to be, that's why when people ask me, John, what books do you recommend? I don't usually recommend sales books. I recommend psychology books, like Influence by Robert Cialdini, or Selling with NLP, The Unfair Advantage, those type of things. Because human psychology is a science that is historic and has lots of data points, whereas sales has minimal data points and changes on a regular basis, right?
Yeah, and speaking of, it just reminded me of it because you said Influence by Robert Cialdini, stating the reason for your call. They did this research. You're probably familiar with this if you read the book, but they had a bunch of people go up and ask if they could cut in line to make a Xerox copy, and 43% of the people said sure. Right. And then they said, hey, can I cut in line because I have to make a copy? The reason that is not valid, it's obvious, but because they said the word because and then stated a reason, there was 94% compliance. I think that's the right number. And that hasn't changed. So just like you're saying, 80% of your studying and self-development should be on this timeless stuff: psychology, behavioral economics, understanding how the human brain makes decisions, and then spend the rest of your time experimenting with new techniques and evolving your approach.
Love it. Yeah, it's so important to stay. That's why I think psychology majors a lot of times make the best sales reps, because they understand how human interaction works, as opposed to just using a technique because I was told to use a technique. They understand fundamentally why, and that reason, by the way, translates into one of the next questions I'll ask is questioning. I actually think I found that by giving people the reason for my question, they're way more open to giving me the answer. So for instance, a lot of times when you ask the question, right, it's the person on the client or the prospect is kind of like, all right, sales rep, why are you
triggers
asking
defensiveness,
me? Right? There's defense. Because in the back of their head, they're like, why are you asking me that question? And what are you going to do with it? Right. So what I do is I tell them why I'm asking that question. So I'll say, hey, could you help me understand what are the priorities when your CEO stood up in the beginning of the year and said, these are the three things, like what were those three things? The reason I ask is because if I can't impact those, then it's not worth us having this conversation.
I love that. I wish I have tried that in my career and like had that insight that you just had, but that's new to me. And I think it's amazing. I want to go test it out.
So try it out. It's a game changer, because you'll literally hear the person be like, "Oh, okay," you know what I mean? Like, "Oh, well, okay."
I love it.
And so as that relates to questioning, one of the things that the most recent one, and then we've got about 3 minutes left here, but the closing one. You said closing techniques are dead. Now I train closing techniques, so obviously, we could have a debate on this for a whole other show. But what was the big takeaway? Because I think the takeaway here was more important than the title. But what did you find with the data about closing and the success of closing as it relates to the closing call versus the discovery call?
Yeah, in hindsight, I probably could have chosen a better title for that article because
got me to open it.
Yeah, exactly. What we found is that we analyzed all of the calls throughout a sales cycle. And I went to my data science team and said, hey, we haven't analyzed closing calls yet. Let's look at the difference between a successful closing call, one that leads to a closed deal, and one that leads to a lost deal. And they pored over the data, and I pored over the data for weeks. And there was literally not a single difference that we could find, except for one, which I'll direct the listeners to the article to find out. Yep. But the point is, there was no difference between these closing calls that led to success or not success. And there were wild, stark differences between calls that happen earlier in the sales cycle. And so, long story short, the takeaway is, the things you do early on set the trajectory more so than the things you do late in the game. If you had a shitty discovery call and a shitty demo, and then you get on a closing call, and I don't care how much conviction you exude through your tonality or whatever the hell people are saying these days, if you didn't do the front end of the sales cycle right, no slick line is going to help you close. No amount of belief in your product and vision, none of that's going to help you. But if you set the stage right early on, and then at the end you simply exercise decisiveness, which is really what closing is. I don't hate the word closing, but I don't think it's an accurate word. I think the right word, I can see why this is not adopted because it's clunky. It's exercising decisiveness on behalf of your prospect. Now that comes into play. So I feel like that was a very roundabout way of me trying to explain that.
No, but, I think closing. So I think the big misperception that people have on closing is that it happens at the end. What you reinforce, which is what I train, which makes me feel better about training the techniques, is that closing happens at every single stage of the sales process to get a next step, to close on them getting, you getting more information or whatever it is. And so understanding the assumptive close, the trial close, those type of things, but how to apply them early and ask better questions and layer and stuff like that sets up the close. Now, I never agree that closing just happens. I do believe you have to just ask the question. But sometimes it can be as simple as, so when are you going to sign that contract? And when should I expect the signature? I mean, that's as simple as it could be at that point. But early on is making sure you're doing all those right things, because ultimately that's why I disagree with a lot of, I'm not going to name any names, but there are some sales trainers, some sales training orgs out there that still are Wolf of Wall Street, stuff it down your throat. What, you don't want to make money? Blah, blah, blah. Well, then I don't know what, like, dude, like, fuck you. If some rep, I mean, maybe that's good for used car salesmen still, but in the world of B2B selling, hardcore closing techniques at the end of the sale are about as old school as it gets. And data shows are absolute bullshit. So
yeah,
thank you for that. Awesome, Chris. Well, I think we could have this conversation. We could go all day with this conversation because I got so many questions around the data. But I'm going to recommend everybody, because a lot of the questions that I guarantee you have about cold calling, Clarissa, for instance, she asked, with today's busy world and cold calling really effective? Yes, it is, if done right, Clarissa. And if your audience if your audience is on the phone, there are some audiences that don't have phone or whatever it is. So yeah, so understand your ICP, understand your personas, but get better on the phone. We didn't even talk about all the other stuff that we said before this, Chris, as far as where voice is going with Alexa and Google Home and that type of stuff. All you have to do, everybody.
We need a follow-up. We have to have another one of these.
We'll absolutely have a follow-up, because all I'm going to say to those skeptics out there is look at the data that Gong is putting out there, and all you got to do is follow the money. Amazon, Google, Microsoft, like literally the biggest companies in the world are putting all of their money into voice. So if you're not into voice in some way, shape, or form, there's a strong possibility you are going to miss out on a massive opportunity coming up here in the near future. So with that, Chris, tell everybody where they can find out more information about Gong and you and everything else, and if they got questions that they can ask.
Yeah, I would say just connect with me on LinkedIn, Chris Orlob, ORLOB, as in boy. And take a look at the posts we've put on LinkedIn, not just our blog. They're going to be the same content, but LinkedIn has the benefit of hundreds and hundreds of comments, and they're always really interesting to read through. So connect with me on LinkedIn, Chris Orlob. If you're interested in Gong, check out our website, gong.io, gong.io.
The new beautiful Gong website.
Yeah.
Awesome, Chris. Well, thank you so much. We're definitely going to have you back on here in a month or two, but I really appreciate your time. And everybody, keep the questions coming. Keep crushing it out there. Get on the phones, but do it right and have some fun with it, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great week and make it happen. Later. Cool. Thanks, bud. Appreciate it.
Oh, man. My laptop